I'm Emma, and up until now, I've always been a pretty private person, never the type to air my personal stuff on social media. Today, though, I didn't expect I'd end up sharing my story here. I don't have friends to talk to about my struggles or sadness, but man, today I'm just so down and desperate. I'm turning to this space to unload some of this heaviness and maybe get some advice. My life's pretty much confined to a tiny room with a single bed, an old dusty desk, and a computer screen. My escape to a freedom the real world never gave me. I love playing online games, not because I'm any good, but because in there I can be a different version of myself. Stronger, bolder, not the shy girl who keeps her head down walking through crowded streets. I never imagined that virtual world would end up changing my life forever. One rainy evening, while I was glued to a match, I heard his voice crackle through the mic. "You're playing healer? I've got your back." His voice was deep, warm, and had this weirdly magnetic pull. His name was Jack, 34, 10 years older than me. I didn't think much of it, just nodded along in voice chat and kept playing. But after that, he started talking to me more. It went from simple stuff like, "What's your favorite class?" or "How long you been playing this game?" to hours-long conversations after the matches ended. He'd tell me about when he was a kid obsessed with gaming, how he loved listening to the rain while parked in front of a screen, or the nights he'd pull all-nighters just to finish some brutal quest. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, I started looking forward to hearing his voice every night, like it was a habit I couldn't shake. After 2 months of chatting online, Jack asked me out. I hesitated. I'd never dated anyone before, never even thought I'd open up to someone, especially not a guy I only knew through text and a voice in my headset. I was scared he wouldn't be who I imagined, scared I'd let him down. But he was patient, never pushy. "If you're not ready, I'll wait," he said, his voice soft like a breeze rustling through the trees outside my window. I thought about him for days, how he always knew how to make me laugh, how he made me feel less alone. In the end, I said yes. The first time we met, I stood outside a little coffee shop, clutching my bag with shaky hands, palms sweaty as hell. I was in a thin sweater and old jeans, wondering if I looked too sloppy. Jack stepped out of a beat-up gray car, dressed in a crisp suit, flashing a gentle smile. He was taller than I'd pictured, his dark hair a little messy from the wind, and his eyes deep, like they held a whole mysterious ocean. "Didn't want you thinking I'm just some scruffy dude glued to a game," he said, winking playfully. I laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt my heart doing this weird, fluttery thing. He led me inside, ordered me a sugar-free milk tea, my favorite, without me even saying a word. I looked at him, wondering how a stranger could get me so well. Those first few months with Jack felt like a sweet dream. He wasn't like the guys I'd met before, shallow types who just spouted cliches or bragged about themselves. Jack was mature, gentle, and paid attention to the tiniest details about me. He remembered I liked sugar-free milk tea, even though I'd only mentioned it once in passing during a chat. On chilly days, he'd always have an extra jacket ready, draping it over my shoulders without me needing to ask. Once, when I was sick, fever so bad I could barely sit up, he showed up at my door with a bag of meds and a steaming bowl of porridge, sitting by my side for hours just to make sure I ate every spoonful. "I don't want you going through anything alone," he said, his voice so sincere I couldn't doubt him. I looked into his eyes and saw a warmth I'd never felt from anyone else. Jack wasn't rich. He freelanced, usually hunched over his computer, working on what he called creative projects. I didn't pry much, partly because I wanted to respect his privacy, partly because I trusted him completely. He lived in a small apartment, simple but tidy, always with the faint smell of coffee he brewed every morning. I loved sitting on the sofa, watching him work, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his eyes locked in this intense focus. Once, I asked what he was up to, and he just smiled. "Something to make the world a better place. You don't need to worry about it." I nodded, didn't dig deeper, because to me, Jack was perfect, strong, gentle, and always putting me first. We started spending more time together. He'd take me for walks in the park on weekends, holding my hand tight as we strolled down tree-lined paths. He'd tell me about books he'd read, movies he loved, and dreams he had when he was younger. "I wanted to be a lawyer once," he said one night as we sat on a bench, gazing at the lake shimmering under the moonlight. "But then, I realized the law isn't always just. His voice dropped, his eyes drifting somewhere far off. I didn't fully get it, just squeezed his hand tighter, figuring it was some old pain he didn't want to unpack. I started dreaming of a future with him, a little house with a garden full of flowers, evenings spent gaming together like when we first met, maybe even a family. I'd never thought I could love someone this much. Jack was the light in my dark life, the one who made me believe I deserved to be loved. But sometimes, I noticed these odd moments with him. He'd go quiet out of nowhere, his eyes drifting off like he was sinking into another world. Once, when I touched his shoulder from behind, he flinched hard, spinning around with this panicked look in his eyes before masking it with that familiar smile. "Sorry, you just caught me off guard," he said, but something felt off. I brushed it aside, telling myself everyone has their private corners. I loved him, and that love blinded me. As time went on, we grew closer. He started opening up more about his past, the rough years growing up in a poor neighborhood where violence and injustice were just part of the scenery. "I hate people who prey on the weak," he said, his voice dropping low, gripping his coffee mug so hard his knuckles turned white. I nodded, thinking it was just his empathy for the downtrodden. I had no idea those words were the seeds of a horrifying secret. One time, he told me about a childhood friend who'd been beaten to death by a stepfather and how he'd watched it all happen, powerless. If I'd been stronger, maybe he wouldn't have died, he said, his voice choking up. I hugged him, trying to comfort him, not realizing that story wasn't just a memory, it was the spark that had set him ablaze, turning him into something I couldn't even fathom. Our relationship lasted 2 years. I started noticing subtle changes in Jack, though they were hard to pin down. He still cared for me, still had that gentle side, but some nights he'd come home late, his clothes carrying a weird smell. Not cigarettes or booze, but something I couldn't place, like metal mixed with damp earth. He'd say it was from work, from long group meetings, but his eyes would dodge mine when he answered. I began picking up on little things, the way he'd carefully lock his computer whenever he left the room, the way he'd jump when his phone buzzed at night, the way he'd sometimes look at me with this strange expression, like he was weighing something in his mind. One time, I showed up at his place unannounced to bring him a cake I'd made, a simple chocolate one I'd spent all afternoon perfecting. He wasn't home, but the door was unlocked. I stepped inside, called his name, and got nothing but echoes bouncing off the empty walls. On his desk, his computer was still on, the screen glowing with a document packed with tiny text. I didn't mean to snoop, but my eyes caught a line. He had to die for what he did to that little girl. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was just a movie script, one of those creative projects he'd mentioned, but this uneasy feeling wouldn't let go. I shut the computer off, left the cake on the table, and got out of there, trying to push the thoughts flooding my head back down. I didn't dare ask him right away. I was scared. Scared that if I opened my mouth, I'd shatter the fragile wall between us. So I stayed quiet, kept living in those fake happy days. But deep down, I knew something was lurking. I started paying closer attention. The times he'd slip out at night with no explanation, the little scratches on his hands he brushed off as bumping into stuff, and the way he'd sometimes look at me, eyes full of love but distant, like he was hiding a secret he couldn't let me in on. Everything came crashing down one fateful afternoon. Jack had to leave for a few days for sudden work stuff. He told me not to touch his computer, his tone sharper than usual. "It's work stuff, don't mess with it, okay?" he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I nodded, but after he left, curiosity got the better of me. I didn't mean to invade his privacy, just wanted to pop on a movie to kill time in those empty days without him. But when the screen lit up, a hidden folder stared back at me, no password protecting it. It was labeled Memories. I clicked it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The folder was stuffed with hundreds of files, photos, videos, notes. At first, I thought it was some horror project Jack was working on. He'd said he loved creating content, even dreamed of being a director. But the deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't fiction. Pictures of strangers, pale faces, lifeless eyes, a middle-aged man with a deep gash across his throat, blood pooling on the floor, hands twisted like he'd clawed for life. A young girl, hands bound tight with rope, mouth taped shut, her desperate eyes pleading straight into the lens. I trembled, clamping a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming, But the tears came anyway, unstoppable. I opened a video, my hand shaking so bad I nearly dropped the mouse. The screen flickered, dim light casting shadows in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. There was Jack, my Jack, standing there, holding a blood-streaked knife, the blade glinting under the faint glow. He wore a black hoodie, his face stone cold, emotionless. "You deserve to die for what you did," he said, his voice low and chilling. A scream ripped through, short, desperate. Then the screen went black. I broke down sobbing, unable to believe my eyes. I opened another video, then another. They were all the same: Jack, the knife, and people who never made it out alive. A man stabbed over and over, blood pooling at Jack's feet. A woman strangled, her eyes bulging in her final agony. I couldn't watch it all, but I couldn't stop either. I flipped through the notes, scanned handwritten pages, Jack's familiar scrawl from the little messages he'd leave me every morning. They listed names, addresses, and reasons. One read, "He beats his wife and kids, doesn't deserve to live. March 12th, 2 a.m., Alley 47. Another, "She scams old people, has to pay. June 25th, empty lot east side. Jack wasn't just killing. He'd made himself a self-appointed executioner, a judge in the shadows." I kept reading, my hands shaking so hard the mouse slipped and clattered to the floor. There were dozens of victims, each one sentenced by his own reasoning. A man killed for dealing drugs, another for abusing animals, one more for domestic violence. But what froze me to the core was the last note, written in red ink. "If anyone hurts Emma, they won't get the chance to survive." I locked the computer, curling up on the chair, my mind spinning out of control. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to call the cops, but my legs felt like they were cemented in place. I hugged my head, trying to piece together the chaos in my brain. Jack, the man who held me every night, who made me tea every morning, who promised to protect me forever, was a killer. Not once, not by accident, but a systematic, calculated murderer with no remorse. I thought back to those late nights he came home, the scratches on his hands, those distant stares. It all made sense now, but I'd been too blind to see it. When Jack came back that night, I was still sitting there, eyes red and swollen, clutching a pillow tight. He walked in, flashing that same gentle smile he always did. "What's wrong? You don't look okay," he said, his voice full of concern. He set his bag down and stepped toward me, but I shrank back, my body trembling beyond my control. He stopped, frowning. "Emma, what's going on?" I looked at him, the man I'd loved for 2 years, and all I could see was a monster. I couldn't take it anymore. "Jack, I saw everything. On your computer." "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking, nearly choking in my throat. He stood still, the smile fading from his lips. He didn't deny it, didn't get mad. He just looked at me, those deep eyes now cold as ice. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the steady patter of rain against the window. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his voice low and chilling. He stepped forward, sitting down in the chair across from me, his hands clasped together like he was trying to stay calm. "But since you know, I won't hide it anymore. Yes, I kill people, but you have to understand, I don't do it randomly. I only take out the ones who don't deserve to live, the ones who hurt others, the ones the law can't touch." I shrank back, tears spilling over. "You're insane, Jack. You're not God. You don't get to decide who lives or dies." I screamed, my voice breaking, but he didn't flinch. He moved closer, grabbing my hand. His was ice cold, but gripped mine tight, like he wouldn't let go. "I'd do it all for a better world, Emma. And for you. I'd never let anyone hurt you. Those people, they're trash, the scum of society. I'm just cleaning them up." I yanked my hand free and bolted to the room, locking the door behind me, my heart pounding like it might burst out of my chest. He didn't follow, just stood outside, his voice carrying through the crack, low and steady. "I love you, Emma. Even if you're scared of me, even if you hate me, I still love you more than anything in this world." I buried my face in my hands and sobbed, lost for what to do. The man I loved was a killer, but he loved me with his whole heart, a twisted, sick heart stained with blood and darkness. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the room, clutching a pillow, my mind a total mess. I thought about Jack, the man who'd once been everything to me, now a monster. I remembered how he'd hold me, whispering, "I'll protect you forever," as I lay in his arms. I remembered his laugh, the way he'd grip my hand tight when we walked in the rain, the way he'd make me coffee every morning with that gentle smile. But I also remembered the horrors on his computer, the blood, the knife, and that cold, unfeeling look in his eyes as he killed. I couldn't reconcile those two people in the same Jack. Who was he? The man who loved me, or the killer who didn't hesitate? I wondered, had he ever thought about killing me? If I disappointed him one day, if I betrayed him, would I end up as just another name on his list? But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. He loved me. I could feel it in every touch, every look, every word. He'd written in that note that he'd kill anyone who hurt me. So why was I so terrified of him? I hated myself for still loving him, even just a little. I hated myself for not being able to cut him off completely, for not hating him with every fiber of my being. I thought about calling the police. I could end it all, turn Jack in, let him face the consequences of his crimes. I pictured him in handcuffs, being led away under the cold stares of strangers, and me standing there, watching the man I once loved disappear forever. But then I thought, if he's taken away, I'll lose him. I'd go back to that lonely life, the empty room, the endless nights with no one by my side. I didn't know if I could keep living without him, even if he was a monster. I sat there all night, watching the rain streak down the window, the patter of water tapping at my mind. I thought about the early days when we met, when he was just a voice through the mic, when I was naive enough to believe love could fix anything. I thought about the times he held me, the times he said he loved me, and the times he killed without me ever knowing. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I was breaking apart, piece by piece. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a body so exhausted, it felt like I'd run 100 miles. I stepped out of the room, steeling myself to face Jack, to tell him I couldn't go on, that I was leaving him for good. But he wasn't there. The room was silent as a grave, just the steady tick of the wall clock cutting through. On the table, there was only a letter, neatly placed next to the chocolate cake I'd brought the day before, now cold and stiff. I opened the letter, my hands trembling, tears spilling before I even read the first line. I opened the letter, my hands trembling, tears spilling before I even read the first line. Dearest Emma, I know you're scared of me, and I don't blame you. I can't stand seeing you suffer because of me, can't bear the thought of you looking at me like I'm a monster every day. I'm leaving, so you can have peace. I don't want you living in fear, don't want you torn between me and what you believe is right. But you need to know I love you, more than my own life. I've done terrible things, I know that, but I don't regret them, because I believe I was cleaning up this world, making it better for you. If you ever need me, I'll always be here. I'd never hurt you. I promise. Jack. I sat there, the letter in my hands, tears streaming down onto the ink, blurring the words. I didn't know what to do. I could hand this letter to the police, let them hunt him down, make him pay for the lives he took. I could throw it away, pretend none of this ever happened, and live with the silent ache. Or I could keep it, a memento of a love that's dead, a reminder of the man I once loved and now couldn't recognize. I looked out the window. The rain was still falling, just like the day I first met him in that virtual world. I wondered, could I go on living without him? Could I forget what I'd seen, what I knew? Could I forgive him, or at least forgive myself for loving a monster? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that, from now on, my life would never be the same. I stood up, clutching the letter to my chest, and stepped out into the rain, letting it wash away my last tears. Or at least, I hoped it would.